We did this with the NFC North. We're going to keep doing this for all the teams we chat about. The Atlanta Falcons offseason in 60 seconds. They hired Raheem Morris to be their head coach. Zach Robinson is his offensive coordinator. Both those guys coming over from LA. Moved on from both Bud Dupree and Calais Campbell, which is notable because they played a combined 1,400 snaps for this defense last year. Signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million deal with $90 million guaranteed. A couple other free agent moves. Signed Darnell Mooney to a 3-year, $39 million deal with 26 guaranteed. Charlie Warner comes over to this team in free agency as well. He got 3 targets for the Niners last year, which is hilarious. He's going to be a bigger part of this team than that team. They drafted Michael Penix Jr. with the 8th overall pick in the draft. Still the best moment of the draft and a moment that will define this team for many years to come. With their next 3 picks, they go after guys on the defensive line. Ruka Roro, Braylon Trice, Brandon Dorless. And the latest one, and potentially the most important ones, the Falcons in the last 24 hours have traded a 3rd-round pick for Matthew Judon. No new contract for him, per Jonathan Jones of CBS, which is notable considering what's going on with the Hassan Reddick saga over there. And, according to Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network, Justin Simmons is now coming aboard on a 1-year, $8 million deal. To fit all of this in, the Falcons have converted Chris Lidstrom's $12 million base salary to a signing bonus. They had $3 million in space before they added these 2 guys. So pretty clear declaration here from the Falcons. We think we're going to be good. We think it's worth pushing the chips into the middle. We'll see how that goes.
That might have been the first one that I'm certain you didn't get it under 60 seconds, but this is a team that did a lot. Like there was no way you were going to get that under 60 seconds. This is, like you said, a team that made a lot of moves from basically the start of free agency through the draft, certainly through the draft, and then all until now to try to win the division. I think that they very much know how close they were to winning the division last year with a lot of things that went wrong and said, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen again this year.
I understand the aggressiveness. What do you think of the Judon and Simmons moves, period? I keep trying to say Jesse Bates. I did it 10 times to Beller before we started recording the show. I keep calling Justin Simmons Jesse Bates. So I'm going to try not to do that over the course of this podcast, but there's a good chance that it happens.
Maybe it's the Jays, both their first
Their
names.
names aren't even similar. My brain is just turning into pudding.
I mean, some of the biggest moves this team has made is signing safeties with Jays. So I don't know. Maybe that's it. I like the Simmons signing a lot, just on the basis of, so he's not the player he was 2-3 years ago, right? Just in terms of the range, I think he's lost that a little bit. I still think he is a good player, though. I think he does a really good job of seeing what's in front of him, driving downhill. He's still very much a guy who is willing to hit and be physical, whether that's in the run fit or just hitting guys over the middle, tackling, all that sort of stuff. I still think he gives you that. I think when you combine that with a player like Bates, who is also pretty versatile, can play in and out of the box, can play in center field if he needs to, I think this actually gives them a good degree of flexibility with their safeties, which I think, given that Raheem Morris, I think, is going to play a lot of 2 high coverages, is actually a pretty good thing for this defense. So stylistically, I really like that. Again, maybe Simmons, loses another step, and that's where you see the problem. But like as an idea, I like this a lot. Judon, the Judon thing, I like going and getting a guy, but the problem is I just can't gauge how much this actually fixes anything, because I just think the rest of the edge room is so bad. So it's great that they went out and got a guy that at worst is probably going to get them at least 8 sacks. But again, I still don't know if that moves the needle for this defense up front.
This to me feels like we know we're close and we're going to try to push it set of moves. And I understand thinking that. I also understand that when teams have done that in the past, it hasn't necessarily worked out the way that they've wanted it to. Even like the 3rd-round pick for potentially 1 year of Matthew Judon, if you're not going to give him an extension. And if they're not going to give him an extension, how happy is he going to be going there? Is it going to be the same set of circumstances that allowed him to force his way out of New England? These are 2 big holes on the roster, though. Like there's no way around that. I mean, Richie Grant or whoever's going to play that second safety spot, and then to steal a term of yours, I mean, we got NPCs at the edge rusher spots right now. I mean, Arnold Ebiketie, who we'll talk about a little bit later, was their best pass rusher coming off the edge. He played like 200 pass rush snaps for this team last season. So Judon, even coming off a year where he didn't play, questions about his age, etc. These are going to be upgrades, and these are going to be upgrades for a defense that still had a lot of question marks. And if we think the defense can now be at a level where they are an average-ish unit, and this can be a top 12 offense, this team probably is just solidifying its place as the best team in the NFC South and thinking, if we make the playoffs, who knows what can happen. And I guess I understand that, even if I think the ceiling for them is still a little bit capped compared to the really, really good teams in the NFC.
I think that's probably right. I don't know if this changes how I feel about like their Super Bowl chances or anything, but as far as
Yeah,
like securing the division, I think these definitely went a long way for that for sure.
I totally agree with that. As I looked and studied the best, excuse me, as I looked at and studied the other teams in the division over the last 24 hours preparing for this, I probably already felt better about the Falcons than any of these other teams. And this definitely helps take it over the line. For each of these teams, like we did with the AFC North, we're doing a blue chip check in. Just taking a step back, taking stock of how many elite players we think are on this roster. I'm curious what your answer was for the Falcons here.
I have 4, I think.
4.
4. Yeah, so Chris Lindstrom, Jesse Bates last year was you could count on one hand, I think, the amount of players. There are safeties that played better than he did. Like he
Oh,
was
you write that one in
phenomenal.
pen. Like he
Yeah,
absolutely deserves that sort of treatment now, 100%.
he was just awesome. Especially just moving downhill. Like not many guys would come up and fly like him. So I love that. AJ Terrell to me is still one of the better corners in the NFL. I'll give that to him, even if it's close. And then I am like major Drake London pilled, man. I'll talk about this
Oh,
later in the show
come
in different
on.
categories. I am so Drake London pilled.
Blue
I think
chip?
he's that good. Yes, I really think he is that good.
How many receiving yards did Drake London have last year?
It's probably like 600, and I don't care. I think that's a Desmond Ritter problem.
I know that's an unfair question to ask, and I know that I'm cheating and asking it. How are we defining blue chip players?
I mean, blue chip to me is like this guy can define what your unit is on that side of the ball, and I think Drake. I
Okay.
think
All
Drake
right.
London absolutely can do that.
Okay, so you're shying away from where you sit in the hierarchy or pecking order of players at your position because there's no way you can make a legitimate argument right now that Drake London is a top 10 receiver in the NFL. Not even top 12.
If I really thought about it, I could probably get him around 12 or 10. I really think he's that good. How many? Okay, let me ask you this: how many receivers in the NFL do you think have better ball skills than Drake London? It's no
That's a good
more than 2 or
question.
3.
Yeah, that's
It's
probably
maybe
fair.
like Mike Evans, Nuke at his best, and then it might be Drake.
I'm giving you shit about this. I think Drake London's a really good player, and I'm actually really excited to see Drake London in this offense. I cannot call Drake London a blue chip player on August 15th, 2023. Yeah,
I
if
listen.
if you're removing him from the circumstances, I get that he has been very good, but that's a little bit fast for me. I literally had another bullet point after Lindstrom, Jesse Bates, and AJ Terrell saying, think Drake London is capable of a big step forward this year. Like, we'll see. After this year, maybe it's a conversation, but I'm not quite there yet. And also, we'll see which Grady Jarrett still has left in the tank. Obviously, he's been hurt. He's a little bit older, et cetera. I don't think he's a blue chip guy, but talk about the red chip potential guys on this roster. Those are the two that I would throw out there. The other kind of counterbalance that we've done with this, other than the outside of the blue chip consideration, what significant question marks does this team have? Where did you land with that?
Still like most of the defense. Like I think the corner 2 spot is still in flux. I don't really love this linebacker core. Most of the defensive line, even with Judon, like the pass rushing unit is not great. Defensive line, like you mentioned, Grady Jarrett will probably still be good, but I don't know if he's going to be the impact player that he's been in years past, especially coming off an injury. He's over, like, I think he's over 30 at this point, so you kind of have to wonder there. And offensively, I don't know if it's like glaring hole, but I probably don't think the offensive line is as good as maybe some people do, but it's not like glaring hole. I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean that unit is fine, and I do
Yeah.
think that they have their limitations, especially in pass protection, and we'll see what this staff does to potentially mitigate those. Obviously, whatever you think of Arthur Smith, that offense hid some of those weaknesses along the offensive line very well, especially in 2022. Number 3 receiver is Ray McLeod right now. Like he's the number 3 receiver on this team actively. So I think that's something that's worth mentioning. The other edge rusher spot, even after bringing in Judon, I think is worth talking about. We talked about Ebiketie. Zach Harrison, I think, is really built for the scheme they were running last year. So we'll see what that rotation looks like. The interior of the defensive line, yeah, you aging players with Onyemata and Grady Jarrett, but they've tried to supplement that with some youth. I think that blend could be fine. And then the other thing I had is second outside cornerback spot. So you had Clark Phillips working behind Mike Hughes right now. Antonio Hamilton, I actually think, played pretty well for the Cardinals last year. He's actually been playing in the slot, apparently, according to our own Josh Kendall. So how that second and third cornerback spot shake out, I think is definitely worth monitoring as we get a little bit closer to the season. What are you watching in the first month of the season for the Atlanta Falcons? This is the first question we're asking about all these teams. Essentially, your biggest question heading into the season, but what are you paying attention to in the first few weeks?
I mean, there's a ton of change with this roster, so I think you could go any direction. For me, it came
Oh,
down
Drake London
to
had 900 receiving yards last year. I might take it back. Beller just dropped that in the chat. That's more than I thought. I
it's
actually
more than
think
I
that
thought.
getting 900 receiving yards in that offense last year is a minor miracle. So I might walk back some of that Drake London talk.
I'll get you there by the end of this segment with the NFC South. For what I'm watching though, for this team, again, you could go a million different directions because they changed just about everything with this team. For me, it's the coverage menu. You're going from Ryan Nielsen last year, who
He
I
was
thought did
such
a
a
really
sicko.
I know.
Everything about the offense, everything about the skill position players we can talk about, and you're going coverage menu first here.
I know, new quarterback, 3 top 10 skill players, all this, like, new offense. Nah, I
Jesus.
wanna see what's gonna go on in coverage. Because the biggest difference, so they had, obviously, Ryan Nielsen last year, who's now with the Jaguars. They bring in Raheem Morris, who's done a really good job with the Rams the past couple of years. Both Nielsen and Morris were big cover 6 guys. Both of them, were above 15%, top 5 in the league. They really loved that. The difference was what they did with their other 2, like, 2 safety shells. In 2023, the Rams were in quarters 18.1% of the time. The Falcons were about 9%, so like half. And then in terms of cover
That's
two,
got to
the
be
Rams
one of the
were
lower marks in the league, probably at this
it,
point, right?
it was, yeah. And then the
Yeah.
Rams were kind of the opposite, where the Rams 2.8% in cover two, which was I think like bottom three, bottom four in the league. Falcons were at 12.2%, one of the higher marks in the league, or at least above average. So I'm kind of just curious to see how that shakes out. I actually think with Bates and Simmons just how versatile they are, how well they can read the field, how well they can play the middle of the field together and drive down on stuff and trust their eyes. I kind of think moving maybe to more of the quarters world is actually good for them just because of the talent they have back there. So I'm just interested to see how it shakes out and if they shake things up from what they were doing last year with Nielsen.
What do you think Terrell does best? Like, if you were going to deploy him in the best possible way, where would you start? Because I actually have really liked the way that he's played a lot of those cover two looks over the last couple of years. Like when he was doing that with Dean Pease, he was cooking at times.
No, he's good because he's a physical corner. He's a
Yeah.
guy who's willing to come up and put hands in your face. So I do like him for that sort of stuff. I also do think he's still, if they do a little bit more like press quarters type stuff, I actually think he can be really good there because again, it just leans into his physicality. If you lean into a little bit more of the quarters world, you probably open yourself up to him getting fried once or twice a month because he's almost in the Marlon Humphrey range where he's a very good cornerback 95% of the time, but he has some of the worst lowlights that you'll see in the league. I mean, Mike Evans got him a couple times last year. Like that's just kind of the player that he is. And so maybe if you lean into quarters, you run into that problem. Maybe it exposes a guy like Clark Phillips on the outside, but I just think the safeties are such a good fit for it that I'm curious to see if that's where they lean into.
All right, now we'll get past the hipster nonsense here. What am I watching for the first month of the season is what is the structure of this offense and what are we getting out of the $40 million quarterback? I think that's a decent place to start. So many questions. I mean, just so many questions. You have a first-time play caller in Zach Robinson. I assume a huge portion of what they're going to be doing is things that we saw from the Rams over the last couple of years, but this personnel is different. I think that they believe one of their best personnel groupings is going to be the 12 that they can roll out with Charlie Warner and Kyle Pitts. It's obviously very different than what the Rams do. I mean, they don't have three receivers you have to keep on the field. So what does that look like? If you're using Kyle Pitts as a quasi tight end in some of those looks, are we going to get a bunch of condensed formations like we did with the Rams? Drake London, we talked about this on our NFC South Lane Green Questions show. He didn't run a ton of in-breaking routes last year. Like I want to see him on a million digs the same way we got to with Puka Nacua. Like it's a perfect use of his skill set. So is that the type of passing game we're going to see in terms of the structure? And then the running game. I mean, the running game, this is an outside zone team with the Falcons last year. I think for a few different reasons. Their offensive line coach, Dwayne Ledford, who came from Louisville, that's his background. That's what he's comfortable with. And they have the body types to do that. Drew Dahlman's a little bit undersized at center. They have good movement skills. Jake Matthews really moves very well as a left tackle, but the Rams weren't doing a ton of that last year. So is this going to be a team that kind of starts with outside zone as the identity of their run game and they do some of the duo stuff as a complement? And what does the ratio end up looking like? So just a ton of questions about, and Bijan in that, like what types of run does Bijan do best? Like how much does that go into it as you consider the type of team you want to be? So I just think there's so many different questions about what we're going to see out of this team. And I'm confident that can all work out, but it's a mystery right now.
I think with the run game, it's probably going to be a lot more zone because I kind of think that's just like the baby's first Shanahan play caller kind of thing. Is you just lean, that's what the offense was, right? Like, I mean, we saw it even with Slowick last year. They were a heavy zone team because I think that's just what these guys have grown up in. And even if
I think they were
Ty,
closer to 50-50 than I anticipated.
yeah,
Again, based because Shanahan, literally Kyle Shanahan, was doing a lot more gap stuff when Bobby Sloak was there over the last couple of years. I think this is going to be more about the offensive line coach's background than it is about Zach Robinson's background, personally, based on conversations that I've had with the people there.
I mean, that does make a lot of sense. Also, too, this offensive line is kind of a mishmash of like what you even want to do with him because Dahlman feels more of like a zone guy. Lindstrom, you can do whatever because he's awesome.
He's a
But
monster.
like, yeah, he's a monster. Jake Matthews is more of like a zone guy, but then McGarry doesn't really feel as much. It's just kind of a mishmash.
Yeah.
So maybe it is a little bit more up in the air as to where they're going to go with the run game. As for Bijan, I don't think it matters. I think he's
I think
so
you're right about that.
yeah, he's so good. He's so fluid in the way that he reads things out and moves that he'll probably be fine either way. I'm really glad you mentioned Drake London and hopefully getting more in cuts. It's not even just a Drake London thing. This to me is also a Kirk Cousins thing. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember when I charted Cousins the last 2 years, he was like 85% on dig routes, just
Oh, he
absolute
loves throwing those things,
machine.
man.
And yeah, he threw him a ton and he was the best at him. Just like the timing, the placement, understanding exactly how to get it, just depending on the coverage, like where to put it, just absolute money. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I don't think there's many guys who find the ball as easily as Drake London. And if you can do that over the middle in traffic with a quarterback in Cousins who is very much going to trust you to go do that, match made in heaven as far as those two go.
How do you want to see Pitts used? Like, I have my ideas about the best things that I think he can do in an offense like this. I'm curious what you think.
Dude, I really don't know. Like, I think he's more of a true wide tight end than he gets credit for. I think people are like fascinated with the idea that he can go out and play X, or not X, just outside receiver in general. But I just don't think that that's necessary. I actually don't think you really use him like, um, Travis Kelsey is probably the closest to that in terms of like more of a receiver than a tight end. Maybe Mark Andrews, where he's a little bit more of a slot guy, but not playing outside as much. That is maybe the best that I can come up with, or like Jordan Reed, but I don't know. It's they've tried to do every single thing with him, and none of them have stuck, and he's been not healthy for a lot of it. That it's almost hard to understand what I want to do with him.
We talked about this again on the lingering questions show that we did. I don't like the outside the numbers X stuff. Like, I get that it's fun because he is so explosive and watching him stride out, I can see it. We're watching him in practice. You watch routes on air, and it's just like, oh, yeah. Like, why wouldn't we try this? I mean, he might be our most explosive player. But then you actually look at it in practice, and I don't think that he's comfortable running those routes necessarily. I think that he gets jammed up pretty easily, which is kind of hilarious considering he's a tight end and the fact that he's getting pushed into the sideline on some of this stuff. But you watch him on in breakers and benders and like corner routes from the slot. That's what I want to see. And I do feel like in this offense, because of all the condensed splits, if you want to use him more like the Rams were using Cooper Kupp and Nakua, and he's kind of like your ZF type of player more than the X he has been at times in these old offenses, I think that's the best application of him. I don't know if that's what they're going to do, but I do think that there is a convenient marriage within this system. Like, there is a usage of him within this style of offense that I actually do think fits his skill set. I'm just not sure if they see it the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you laid out makes a lot more sense. As far as the outside stuff, we have to remember when he was doing it the first year, they didn't have Drake London. So like they didn't have another guy to go do it. They needed him to do it. And then I think as soon as they got a different big guy out there, they were like, we don't really need him to do that. But that also coincided with Pitts just not being healthy. So I think he wasn't able to really settle into this other tight end slot role that they I think had in mind for him.
What is keeping you up at night as you think about the 2024 Falcons? Again, this is a question we're asking about all of these teams.
The pass rush is still bad. And I had this down obviously before Matt Judon signed, and then I looked and I was like, "Man, you go and get a player like that, maybe I should change it." And then I looked at everything about this unit and it is still just there's nothing about it worth trusting. So, last year, according to Sports Info Solutions, they were 30th in pressure rate as a team. Not very good. Their two leading pressure guys, Calais Campbell and Bud Dupree. Obviously, both of those guys are gone now. You go and get a guy like Judon that helps make up for that. But when those are your two biggest guys, one, that's a concern in and of itself. And then when your two top pressure guys leave, whoever they are, I think that that's always going to be a problem. There are other guys on the roster were supposed to be Braylon Trice. He is, I think, out for the year now, which is a huge problem. He was a little bit more of like a run defender type, but he still would have given them something as a pass rusher. And then other than Judon, it's like Arnold Ebiketie, who you mentioned a little bit earlier, but even he is to me more of in that Bryce Huff at the very best, maybe a Josh Uche, where he's kind of a pure pass rush player only, and he doesn't actually give you anything on earlier downs. And then Grady Jarrett, like we talked about earlier, he's coming off a year where he's been hurt. He's getting older. I just don't know if he's going to be quite the impact player that he was in years past. So you combine all of that, I still think this is probably a bottom 6, 7 pass rush unit, even with a guy like Judon.
Yeah, I don't even know how the pieces fit together necessarily. Like when it's 1st and 10 and they're in base defense, my thought is it's going to be Anyamata, Zach Harrison, Grady Jarrett, and those three kind of interior spots, and then Judon and who's the other outside linebacker? Is it Lorenzo Carter? Is it Ebiketie? I don't know what the right answer for that is. And then when we go to 4 down fronts and nickel, David Onyemata, Grady Jarrett, Judon, and I guess Ebiketie is your like situational pass rush. He only played like 190 pass rush snaps last year. He was really effective on those plays. So I wonder in a different system with a different coordinator where there isn't this fetish for 275-pound edge rushers, do we see him get used a little bit more? And do we see that efficiency potentially translate onto a larger workload? If the answer is yes, and you get something out of the younger guys like Aurora, whatever, they're not going to be pivotal pieces this year, probably, especially him, because I think he was a little bit rawer coming in. But I can see a scenario where it's functional, but I definitely still have questions in the same way that you do.
I mean, Ebiketti's kind of hard to figure out because it's not like Morris's Rams really had a player like this either.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, you're right.
like even in terms of body type, like they just didn't have a smaller guy like that. Like, I mean, shoot, they were putting out a what 300-pound outside linebacker in Michael Hoyt. Like, obviously,
Yeah,
they
and
I don't think they're going to do that again, but it's very different than 240 pounds like Ebiketti.
Yeah, and Byron Young is not very small either.
Mm-mm.
What's keeping me up? It's the questions on defense. It's essentially how well do the blend of veteran pieces and youth work on the defensive line? What does the pass rush look like? That other cornerback spot. I had second safety spot on here until the Justin Simmons thing happened. So there are fewer questions now than there were at this time yesterday, but I think still enough to leave you a little bit worried. Again, not about whether this team can win the NFC South. I think they absolutely can with the state of this defense, but what happens when they do get into the dance against the Niners of the world, the Lions of the world, the Packers, some of these really, really good teams. What are you most excited about as you look forward to the 2024 Falcons this season?
Drake London. I just think he is like I already said it. I am all the way there with him, dude. He is so insanely good. I think he's such a good route runner for a guy his size. He almost has. It's not quite the same because AJ Green was a lot faster, but just in terms of the fluidity for a guy who is that thick, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think London absolutely has that with the ball too. Like he's again not take the ball, Jalen Waddle just going to rip off a 75-yard touchdown out of nowhere. But he turns 5 into 12 in the most bizarre ways. Like it is truly insane to watch. And I think that's going to be huge for this offense where explosives might be hard to come by. So you kind of need a guy who's just going to consistently get out those yards like that. And then I mentioned it earlier. I really don't know how many guys have better, smoother, more consistent ball skills than him. Like he just finds the ball, dude. Like if you just go watch some of his targets in the intermediate range, he makes some of the craziest catches that should be highlights, but because it was the Falcons, nobody cared. But just some of the craziest stuff in traffic. So I'm all the way bought in on him, even if he'll probably never be like top 5 receiver because just explosiveness wise, he doesn't have that. But the rest, man, it's as good as you can get.
And again, I just think that he fits this offense so well. Even what he's willing to do in the run game aligns with what you are asking for receivers from this offense and what the Rams ask their guys to do. I really do think that we could see a huge step forward from him, not only just in production, but I think in the way that we talk and think about Drake London among the other receivers in the league. So you don't really have to sell me on this. I just think throwing him into the blue chip category is very funny. Mine is, can we ever get the Kyle Pitts we thought we were going to get after his rookie year? Like that to me feels like such a crucial part of this, because if you're looking at the Falcons and especially with the other receiving options on the team, I think Mooney is no more than a role player. Like, I think they paid the sticker price for Darnell Mooney. Could he be better than he was in Chicago? Sure. And we'll talk about him in a little bit. But the other third pass catching spot is like a complete question at this point. So you need Kyle Pitts, I think, to carry a lot of the load within this offense. And can he? Like, what is he at this stage? And I know that he wasn't healthy last year. And I know that it was funny. I was talking to somebody on their staff recently, and he said something really that I was made my ears perk up. He was just like, it's very easy to get too creative when you have really good players. And I think that that was part of the issue when you looked at what the Falcons were over the last couple of years. And so I wonder if they can pare some of this stuff back and he's healthy, are we going to get a version of him that, even if it's a little bit different than the ones we've seen over the last few years in terms of usage, is that provides the type of impact we had always hoped? I truly don't know the answer to that. But if the answer is yes, it's going to be fun as shit to watch. Like him with Drake London, Kirk Cousins in a system and an offense that suits him, and he kind of knows, like Bijan back there, it can all come together in the way that we've wanted it to. But I just don't know if the Pitts factor in all of that is going to come together. I truly don't. And that's the thing that I think I'm most curious about and potentially most excited about if it does happen.
If he's healthy, I'm bullish on it. I mean, I've been a Kyle Pitts guy. I think he's fantastic. I think what people I think should probably better understand about Pitts. Obviously, we think it's cool he can go play different positions. He's a really good athlete for tight end. He can move in space really well. The yak. The thing that always fascinated me about Pitts, the way he can contort his body to the ball is mind blowing. And even on throws that are like in the dirt, like under his waist, it's shocking how well he can do it.
But this reminds me of Puka. Think about how
Yes.
many times Puka was making catches over the middle of the field when he's twisting in
Yep.
midair, and then some of the stuff he can do after the catch. Like, that's how I want to see Kyle Pitts used. I want to see him on these in cuts, and even if it's a little bit behind him, he's able to catch it and turn a 8-yard completion into a 30-yard gain. Like, he has that in his bag. And so if we can tap into more of that stuff and less of the you're running go routes outside the number stuff, that's what I want to see. And if he's healthy, I do believe that it can all come together. But I think that the knee and how much that is going to betray him potentially is going to be a huge question with all of that. Your most important supporting character on the Atlanta Falcons this season is?
Darnell Mooney? Question mark. Because so obviously, they have three really good core players. If Pitts is healthy, in London, Bijan, um, and Kyle Pitts. The, the thing is, the rest of the receiving core to me just doesn't move me. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. Ray McLeod might be their number three receiver, but even Darnell Mooney to me, even when he was, supposedly really good 2, 3 years ago, just not my cup of tea as a player. To me, he's very much a guy who is mostly go ball, mostly just winning down the field. I do think that is a valuable part of this offense. You need somebody who can stretch the field and open up
Can you
those
be a
big
sluggo
windows.
merchant?
I mean, if anybody can be, it's this guy. And if you can do it in any offense, it is in this offense. I will say that. I mean, I've seen Kyle and his people get this out of like Aldrick Robinson and Taylor Gabriel. So Mooney could maybe be that. But the thing is, last year he was obviously this is going to have to come down to the quarterback play they were getting last year in Chicago. But he was 87th out of 101 receivers in yards per route run, minimum 35 targets. That was sandwiched between Sky Moore, who is like a non-factor at this point, and Quentin Johnston, who people thought was like DOA as a rookie. So obviously, again, quarterback plays in some factor there, but just not a consistent player at all.
And we've seen this over the last few years with some of these teams that we're spending big on these kind of vertical pieces that just never come together. Like, think about the deal that MVS got from the Chiefs when he originally signed there. Like, this feels like in the bad scenario, that's what this feels like. What's the good scenario? Like, what is the case for why this could work out? And can you compare it to something that you've seen recently?
I mean, it feels cheap because it happened in Atlanta, but like what Taylor Gabriel was for them. Obviously, they're
Yeah.
slightly different players, but like that is you're hoping for someone who can, I don't
Taylor
know,
Gabriel was making like $14 though when
right.
he
That's
was
the
got slotted
difference,
into
right?
that role. The Taylor Gabriel that went to Chicago afterward may be more akin to what Darnell Mooney is going to be for the Falcons after he gets paid and then he's not what you want him to be.
Exactly.
Mine was Ebiketie. We've talked about him like 3 different times. I think that if he can give them a little bit of juice with Judon and, those guys, even if they're aging on the interior, can you get to a place where the pass rush isn't constantly torpedoing your defense? And I think they might be able to. I don't think it's going to be great, but I think that there's a chance it is passable. And with some of the pieces they have on the back end, again, average on defense, I think is potentially a win for this team. And I do think that there's a path to get there. Doing this for every team. What counts as a successful season in your mind for the Atlanta Falcons this year?
Considering they have sold the farm to be good this year, they have to win the division, and I think they have to be a top at least 12 offense. I know we didn't put them top 10 in our show, but for them to be successful on what they've put into this team, it has to be at least a top 12 unit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I said win the division and do it convincingly. Like, get to a place where you show that there is a gap between you and the rest of the teams in the NFC South. Because the way that you've operated this offseason on 2 different fronts, you have to be good to justify this stuff. You have to be good to justify the Judon trade. You have to be good to justify the Simmons signing. You have to be good to justify the Penix pick. Because the entire point of taking him with the 8th overall pick and the company line afterwards was, we think we're going to be too good to be in this position again over the next couple of years. All right. Sounds great. Show me. And we'll see what happens with Cousins. I think that it'll be interesting. I talked to him this week for something that I'm working on, and I asked him how much carryover there is in his mind between what he was doing with O'Connell and what they're doing with Zach Robinson. And he said there's some, but there's a lot of new language. There's a lot of differences. There's a lot of quirks. So I know that it's been tempting to say, oh, the system's the same. Like, he'll take to it instantly. I wonder if there's going to be a little bit more of a learning curve and a little bit more of a ramp up period as they figure out who they want to be on that side of the ball than maybe we've kind of framed it to be over the course of this offseason. I still think they have a chance to be good. I still think they have a chance to be that top 12 unit you're talking about, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a hit the ground running sort of thing like we thought it might be, considering his background with some of these ideas.
I agree with that. I think a few more dominoes need to fall for them to be great than maybe we realize.
Your irresponsible player prediction for the 2024 Falcons is?
Not to bring him up for the 8 millionth time, but I think Drake London leads the NFL in first down receptions.
You are such a coward. You're telling me how Drake London's the best player in the league, and your prediction is he's going to lead in first down receptions?
Do you know who like second and third were, or like first and second were last year? It's like Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. If he does that, he will firmly be a all-pro player. So it's a weird framing to get there. I'm not gonna push back on that. But if he does that, he will be like considered one of the best receivers in the league.
Part of me is already worried about giving you so much shit for this, because your takes last year preseason about some guys turned out to be very, very right. Like, you driving the Lamar train before he won the MVP. I'm a little bit worried that we're going to be able to clip this out in like November when Drake London is on pace for 2,000 yards, and I'm just going to look like a moron. Speaking of 2,000 yards, my irresponsible player prediction is that Bijan goes from 2,000 yards from scrimmage. We have not really talked about Bijan as part of this conversation. If they ride him in the same way that McVay has done with his backs over the years, where it's like you're playing 85% of the snaps. Like, I understand that Tyler Algier is a good player, and Tyler Algier is a good player, but if the usage for Bijan is similar and this offense is good from day one, I mean, he has a chance to just go absolutely nuclear. Even if you have concerns about the ceiling of this group, the line establishes a floor, your quarterback establishes a floor, and your passing game should be good enough to make the entire ecosystem work. So there is a chance that this guy just has a monster year in year 2.
I would love to see it, dude. I love Bijan Robinson. So yeah, we haven't mentioned him a lot, but he is such a fantastic player. And it's funny that these two predictions are like almost at odds. It feels like it would be tough for both of them to happen, but I don't know. Maybe they're randomly a top 5 unit. Who knows?